Stay with me, because what happened in the next 60 seconds turned a perfect night into a public reckoning no one could ignore. The sound came first, sharp and unmistakable, fabric tearing beneath crystal chandeliers, slicing through the soft hum of $1 million Gala like a whispered secret finally spoken out loud. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, champagne glasses froze inches from lips, and for a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Olivia Caldwell stood at the center of it all, 7 months pregnant, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her stomach as the cool air touched skin that should have never been exposed under those lights. 200 guests turned toward her at once, and just as quickly, dozens of phones rose into the air, tiny glowing screens capturing every angle, every second, every truth waiting to unfold. Ethan Caldwell, her husband, the man whose name was etched into the marble walls of the city's most powerful institutions, lowered his hand slowly, his expression not of regret, but of quiet irritation, as if the moment had inconvenienced him more than it had shattered her. Behind him, just half a step to the right, stood Vanessa Blake poised, flawless, her lips curved in something that almost resembled sympathy, if sympathy had edges sharp enough to cut. Olivia didn't look at her husband. Not yet. Her breathing slowed, deliberate, controlled, as if she had rehearsed this moment in silence long before anyone else realized the script had changed. Then it happened. A warmth spread suddenly, unmistakably, beneath the silk of what remained of her gown, tracing a quiet path down onto the polished marble floor. A few gasps broke through the silence, soft at first, then multiplying as realization rippled through the crowd. "Oh my God! Her water just broke!" someone whispered, the words traveling faster than the truth itself. But Olivia didn't collapse. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. Instead, she lifted her chin, just slightly, enough for the chandelier light to catch the calm in her eyes, a calm that didn't belong to someone losing control, but to someone taking it back. The music had stopped. Even the server stood frozen, trays suspended midair, as if the entire room had become an audience waiting for a line that hadn't yet been delivered. Ethan took a step back, subtle but telling, his gaze shifting not to her, but to the growing attention around them, calculating, always calculating. And still, Olivia didn't look at him. Not once. Her focus moved past him, steady, unshaken, landing exactly where it needed to. Vanessa Blake. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Vanessa's face, something too quick for most to catch, but not for the cameras, and not for Olivia. The room held its breath. Because somewhere between the tearing of that dress and the quiet spread of water across marble, the story had changed. And deep down, everyone could feel it. This wasn't a scene of humiliation anymore. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Because when a woman who has been silent for too long finally decides to speak, she doesn't just tell the truth. She rewrites the ending. "Do not move," someone whispered, but no one listened, because no one could look away. The silence that followed felt heavier than the chandeliers above them, pressing down on every shoulder in the room as Olivia Caldwell stood perfectly still, her breathing slow and measured, one hand steady against her stomach as if she were grounding not just herself, but the life inside her. A single drop echoed against the marble floor, then another, soft but impossible to ignore, each sound marking time in a moment that refused to pass. Somewhere in the distance, a glass shattered not from impact, but from trembling hands that had forgotten how to hold anything steady. 37 phones, maybe more now, recorded everything, tiny red lights blinking like witnesses who would never forget what they had seen tonight. Ethan Caldwell exhaled sharply, the kind of controlled breath a man takes before regaining command of a room he believes still belongs to him, and for a brief second, he smiled, a tight, practiced expression designed for boardrooms and press conferences. "This is unnecessary," he said, his voice calm, low, as if speaking to a problem that could be managed, not a moment that had already escaped him. "Olivia, you are causing a scene." But she did not answer. Not immediately. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, careful, deliberate, the movement subtle but powerful, as if she were choosing exactly how the next second would unfold. The room leaned in without realizing it. Even the air seemed to pause. Then she spoke, her voice quiet, steady, and impossibly clear, carrying farther than anyone expected. "No," she said, almost gently. "The scene was created long before tonight." A ripple moved through the crowd, confusion first, then curiosity, then something sharper, something closer to recognition. Ethan's expression flickered, just once, the smallest crack in the face that had been trained never to break. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but his tone had changed, just enough for those closest to hear it, the edge beneath the control. Olivia finally turned her head, slowly, not toward him, but past him, her gaze locking with Vanessa Blake in a way that made several people instinctively step back, as if they had suddenly realized they were standing too close to something they did not understand. Vanessa straightened, her posture flawless, her smile returning, polished, confident, the kind of smile that had opened doors and closed conversations for years. "Olivia," she said softly, her voice smooth, almost kind. "You should sit down. This is not good for you or the baby." But Olivia did not move. She did not blink. And when she spoke again, the calm in her voice felt less like control and more like certainty. "You are right," she said. "It is not good for the baby." A pause. A breath. Then, quieter, sharper, like a line drawn in ink that could not be erased. "Neither is pretending not to know." The words landed differently this time. Not like a statement. Like a warning. Several heads turned, eyes shifting between Ethan and Vanessa, the invisible threads connecting them suddenly visible to anyone willing to look. A man near the bar lowered his phone just slightly, whispering to the woman beside him. "Did she just—" But he did not finish the sentence, because he did not need to. Olivia's hand tightened briefly against her stomach, not in fear, but in resolve, and when she lifted her gaze again, it was no longer searching, no longer questioning. It was directing. "Go ahead," she said softly, her eyes still on Vanessa. "Tell them I am wrong." And for the first time that night, Vanessa Blake did not answer right away. Vanessa Blake smiled, but it came a second too late, and in a room trained to read power, a single second was everything. "There is nothing to tell," she said lightly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to sound reasonable, just enough distance to sound untouchable, but not enough to stop the shift already happening in the room. Because now people were not just watching. They were connecting. Olivia Caldwell did not argue. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if considering something simple, something obvious, and that calm made the tension sharper, not softer. "Then say it clearly," Olivia replied, her tone steady, almost kind. "Say you have never been alone with my husband outside of work. Say you have never worn the necklace he bought 3 months ago. Say you have never answered his phone when I called." The words did not come fast. They came measured, one after another, like steps placed carefully on a path she had already walked in her mind. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd, no longer confusion, but recognition, the kind that made people lean closer instead of stepping away. Ethan moved then, finally stepping forward, positioning himself between the two women, not protective, but strategic, as if proximity alone could control the narrative. "That is enough," he said, his voice firm now, sharper, the tone he used when closing deals, when ending discussions, when deciding outcomes. "You are emotional. You are not thinking clearly." Olivia looked at him for the first time since the moment began, and something in that look made him pause, just for a fraction of a second. Not fear. Not anger. Something quieter. Final. "No," she said softly. "This is the first time I am." Another contraction of silence followed, not physical, but emotional, tightening around everyone in the room as the story they thought they understood began to rearrange itself. Near the back, a man in a dark suit whispered, "Check the footage," and it was unclear whether he meant security cameras or the dozens of phones already capturing everything, because at this point, it did not matter. The truth was no longer private. Vanessa's posture remained perfect, but her eyes shifted, just once, toward Ethan, searching for something, a signal, a direction, a rescue that did not come quickly enough. And that was when Olivia took a small step forward, controlled, careful, but unmistakable, closing the distance not with force, but with certainty. "You do not need to explain everything," she said, her gaze steady on Vanessa. "Just tell them about last Thursday. The dinner on West 57th Street. The reservation under a different name." A sharper reaction this time. Several heads turned instantly. Someone near the center of the room whispered the restaurant name under their breath, recognition spreading faster now, because places like that did not go unnoticed. Ethan's jaw tightened, the calm slipping, replaced by calculation that was now visible instead of hidden. "We are leaving," he said abruptly, reaching out, not forcefully, but decisively, as if ending the moment by removing it. But Olivia did not move. She did not follow. She did not allow the scene to close. Instead, she exhaled slowly, her hand still steady against her stomach, and spoke one more time, her voice quieter now, but somehow carrying even farther. "You can walk away," she said, her eyes moving between them. "But the truth does not leave with you." And this time, no one in the room doubted that something irreversible had already begun. "Call the doctor," someone finally said, the words cutting through the tension like a lifeline. But Olivia did not turn toward the voice, and she did not move. Because this was not the moment she had been waiting to survive. This was the moment she had been waiting to finish. The air in the ballroom had shifted completely now, no longer heavy with shock, but charged with something sharper, something that felt dangerously close to judgment. Phones were no longer just recording. They were witnessing. Ethan Caldwell glanced around the room, and for the first time that night, the control he had built over years of influence and reputation seemed to slip just enough for others to notice. Conversations were no longer silent. They were happening in whispers, quick and pointed, eyes moving between him and Vanessa, then back to Olivia, recalculating everything they thought they knew. "We are done here," Ethan said again, more firmly this time, stepping closer as if proximity alone could close the gap that had already opened in front of him. But Olivia shook her head once, slow and deliberate, her gaze never leaving Vanessa. "No," she said quietly. "You are done hiding." The words did not rise. They settled. And that made them heavier. Vanessa inhaled, subtle but visible, her composure tightening like a carefully stitched seam under pressure. "This is inappropriate," she replied, her tone still smooth, but thinner now, stretched across something she could no longer fully control. "You are making assumptions based on emotion." Olivia almost smiled at that, not with amusement, but with recognition, as if she had heard that exact sentence too many times before. "Then explain the bracelet," she said, her voice steady. "The one you wore last week at the charity luncheon. The one I picked out with him 2 years ago." A pause. A longer one this time. Long enough for the room to lean in again. Someone near the front shifted, whispering, "I remember that." And suddenly memory was no longer private either. Ethan stepped in again, faster now, his voice cutting through before Vanessa could respond. "Enough," he said sharply. "You are embarrassing yourself." But Olivia did not react to him. Not this time. She took another careful breath, her hand tightening briefly against her stomach as a new wave of discomfort passed, but her posture did not break. If anything, she stood straighter, as if the pressure only clarified her purpose. "No," she said again, softer now, but more certain than before. "I was embarrassed when I believed you." That landed differently. The room felt it. Even Ethan did. His expression hardened, but the certainty behind it had cracks now, small but visible. Near the back, a member of the event staff spoke quickly into a headset, and moments later, a uniformed medical team appeared at the edge of the crowd, moving carefully, respectfully, but with urgency that did not interrupt the silence so much as flow around it. "Ma'am, we need to take you to the hospital," one of them said gently, stepping closer, careful not to startle her. Olivia nodded once, acknowledging them, but she did not move immediately. Not yet. Instead, she let her gaze sweep the room one final time, not searching for sympathy, not asking for validation, but simply allowing the truth to settle where it needed to. Then she looked back at Vanessa, her expression calm, almost peaceful now. "You can keep what was never yours," she said quietly. "But you cannot keep what everyone just saw." No one spoke. No one interrupted. Because in that moment, it was no longer about accusation. It was about confirmation. The kind that did not need proof anymore. As the medical team moved closer, Olivia finally allowed herself to be guided, one careful step at a time, away from the center of the room. And as she did, the space she left behind did not close. It widened, leaving Ethan Caldwell standing exactly where he had been, surrounded by people who were no longer looking at him the same way, and Vanessa Blake just a step behind him, perfectly still, for the first time without a single word that could fix what silence had already revealed. The doors opened before anyone asked them to, and the sudden rush of cooler night air slipped into the ballroom like a quiet reset the room did not deserve. Olivia Caldwell moved forward slowly, supported on either side by the medical team, her steps careful but steady, each one measured not by weakness but by intention. The crowd parted without being told, creating a path that had not been there before, not out of courtesy, but out of something closer to respect, or perhaps realization. Behind her, the murmurs did not fade. They grew. Soft at first, then sharper, names being spoken, moments being recalled, details aligning into something that could no longer be dismissed as misunderstanding. "I saw them," someone whispered near the front. "Last month, at the hotel on Park Avenue." Another voice followed, lower but firmer. "That was not a business dinner." Phones continued to rise, not to capture Olivia anymore, but to capture what remained behind her. Ethan Caldwell stood still, his posture rigid, his expression carefully reconstructed, but the room no longer responded to it the way it once had. Influence requires belief, and belief, once cracked, does not return quietly. Vanessa Blake shifted slightly, just enough to step closer to him, as if proximity could restore alignment, but even that movement felt different now, no longer seamless, no longer invisible. "Say something," she murmured under her breath, her voice controlled but urgent, the first real fracture in her composure. Ethan did not respond immediately. His eyes followed Olivia as she reached the threshold, as if calculating whether this moment could still be redirected, still contained, still managed. But some moments do not belong to strategy. Some moments belong to consequence. At the entrance, Olivia paused. Not because she had to, but because she chose to. The city lights stretched beyond the glass doors, reflections shimmering across polished surfaces, and for the first time that night, the noise behind her felt distant, like something already fading into the past. One of the paramedics spoke gently. "We need to go now, ma'am." And she nodded. But before stepping through, she turned her head slightly, just enough to look back, not at the crowd, not at the room, but at the man who had once defined her life. Ethan met her gaze, and for a brief second, the space between them held something unspoken, not reconciliation, not regret, but recognition. He understood. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know that whatever control he thought he had, whatever version of the story he planned to preserve, was already slipping beyond his reach. Olivia did not speak. She did not need to. The silence between them carried more weight than any words could. Then she turned away, stepping fully into the night, into the waiting ambulance, into a future that no longer included explanation or permission. The doors closed softly behind her, not with finality, but with certainty. Back inside, the music did not resume. No one returned to their tables. Because something had changed in a way that could not be undone. A man near the stage lowered his phone and said quietly, "It is already everywhere." And he was right. Across the room, screens glowed brighter as messages were sent, videos shared, headlines forming in real time. Ethan Caldwell remained where he was, surrounded not by allies, but by observers, people who were no longer sure which side of the story they were standing on. And Vanessa Blake, still beside him, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, finally understood that perfection does not survive exposure. Because in a world built on image, it only takes one moment of truth, captured from the right angle, to make everything else impossible to believe. The ambulance doors had barely closed before the world outside began to move faster than the one Olivia had just left behind, sirens low and steady as the city blurred past in streaks of white and gold. But inside, everything felt quiet, controlled, intentional, like a space where truth no longer needed to compete to be heard. Olivia Caldwell leaned back carefully, her breathing measured, her hands still resting against her stomach, not in panic, but in reassurance, as if she were reminding herself that this part of the story was no longer about survival alone. One of the paramedics monitored her vitals, his voice calm, professional. "You are doing well, just keep breathing with me." And she nodded, her focus steady, but her mind no longer in the ambulance. Because somewhere behind her, in that ballroom filled with glass and cameras and carefully curated power, something had already begun to unravel. Back at the gala, the absence she left behind had grown louder than her presence ever was. Conversations no longer hid behind politeness. They sharpened. "That video is already trending," a woman near the bar said, her phone angled toward a small circle of onlookers, the screen glowing with the moment everyone had just witnessed from a dozen different perspectives. "They are replaying it frame by frame." Another voice added, quieter but more certain. "It is not just the dress. It is everything she said after." Ethan Caldwell stood in the center of it, still composed, still upright, but now surrounded by something unfamiliar, not admiration, not respect, but distance. People did not approach him. They observed him. And observation, without loyalty, is a dangerous place for a man who built his world on perception. Vanessa Blake tried to speak again, her voice low, controlled. "We should leave." But even that suggestion carried uncertainty now, as if leaving might confirm what staying could no longer hide. Ethan finally moved, adjusting his jacket, his expression resetting into something practiced, something public, but the room did not respond the way it once had. A man he had known for years gave a brief nod, then looked away. Another turned his body slightly, creating space that had never existed before. Small movements. Quiet decisions. But together they formed a pattern. And patterns, once visible, do not disappear. "It will pass," Ethan said under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else, but even as he said it, a phone buzzed loudly nearby, followed by another, then another, notifications stacking, headlines forming, names attaching themselves to a narrative that was no longer his to control. "Local businessman involved in public incident," one screen read. "Gala confrontation raises questions," another followed. And then, more direct, more final. "Pregnant wife speaks out." Vanessa's composure tightened further, her gaze scanning the room, calculating, searching for alignment that no longer existed. Because influence can survive doubt, but it cannot survive exposure repeated in high definition from every angle. Outside, the ambulance turned onto a quieter street, the siren lowering, the city settling into something steadier, something less performative. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, not in exhaustion, but in clarity, as if she were allowing the noise to fall away completely. She had not shouted. She had not pleaded. She had simply spoken. And in doing so, she had shifted something that could not be shifted back. Back at the gala, Ethan finally reached for his phone, his fingers moving quickly, decisively, but even that gesture felt different now, not commanding, but reactive. Because for the first time in a long time, he was not ahead of the story. He was inside it. And stories, once released into the world, do not wait for permission to be told. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, the story had already outrun it. Inside the emergency entrance, sliding doors opened with a soft mechanical hush, and a team was waiting, prepared, efficient, ready to take over. But Olivia Caldwell did not rush, and she did not panic. She moved with the same quiet control she had carried through the night, her focus steady, her breathing aligned with each step as if she had decided long ago that even this moment would not take anything from her. "You are safe here," a nurse said gently, guiding her forward, and Olivia nodded, not because she needed reassurance, but because she understood something deeper, that safety was no longer about where she stood, but about what she had already done. As she was wheeled down a brightly lit corridor, the world outside continued to accelerate. Back at the gala, the event had dissolved into something unrecognizable. No music, no speeches, no carefully planned schedule. Only clusters of conversations, screens glowing in every hand, voices lowering and rising as new details surfaced in real time. "They are saying this is not the first time," someone murmured near the entrance. "There are photos," another replied, scrolling quickly, eyes widening. "Different events, different dates." The narrative was no longer forming. It was expanding. Ethan Caldwell stood near the center of the room, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and controlled, but there was an urgency beneath it now, something sharper, something less practiced. "Shut it down," he said quietly, turning slightly away from the nearest group. "Call legal, call PR. I want everything contained before morning." But even as he spoke, another phone buzzed nearby, then another, and the speed of it made containment feel like an idea that had already expired. Vanessa Blake stood just behind him, her posture still precise, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes moved constantly now, tracking reactions, measuring distance, calculating which connections still held and which had already begun to fade. Because this was not just exposure. This was repositioning. And in rooms like this, repositioning happens fast. A man who had once greeted Ethan with a handshake now offered only a nod from across the room. A woman who had stood beside Vanessa earlier now stepped slightly away, her body angled just enough to signal separation without confrontation. Small movements again. But unmistakable. Outside the hospital room, a doctor reviewed Olivia's condition, his tone calm, professional. "We are monitoring closely. Everything is progressing. You are doing well." And Olivia listened, absorbing the words without fear, without doubt, as if her body and her voice had finally aligned toward the same outcome. She rested her hand gently against her stomach, feeling the steady response beneath it, a quiet reminder that not everything had been taken from her, that some things remained untouched by betrayal, untouched by spectacle. Back at the gala, Ethan ended the call, lowering his phone slowly, his jaw set, his mind already shifting into strategy, damage control, reconstruction, but for the first time, the variables were not his to control. Because the story was no longer in the room. It was everywhere else. "It is trending nationwide," someone said quietly, not to him, but close enough for him to hear, and that single sentence carried more weight than anything spoken aloud all night. Vanessa stepped closer again, her voice lower now, almost careful. "We can fix this," she said, but even she did not sound certain anymore. Ethan did not answer. Because for the first time, he understood that this was not a situation to manage. This was a consequence to endure. And consequences, once seen by millions, do not disappear when the lights go out. Morning did not arrive quietly. It came with headlines, with notifications, with the kind of attention that does not ask permission before it spreads. In a private hospital room on the 12th floor, sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, soft and controlled, a stark contrast to the storm unfolding beyond those walls. Olivia Caldwell lay propped against crisp white pillows, her breathing steady now, her expression calm in a way that no longer needed effort. Machines hummed quietly beside her, their rhythm consistent, grounding, real. A nurse adjusted the monitor gently and offered a reassuring smile. "Everything looks stable," she said, and Olivia nodded, her hand resting lightly against her stomach, feeling the quiet response beneath it, a reminder that not everything had been taken, that something still belonged entirely to her. On the small table beside her bed, a phone rested face down, but even without looking, she already knew. The world had seen. The world had decided to keep watching. Across the city, screens told the story in fragments and loops, the same moment replayed from different angles, slowed down, analyzed, discussed. "Exclusive footage from last night's gala," one morning show host announced, her voice polished but edged with curiosity. "Questions are now being raised about the Caldwell empire, and what may be happening behind closed doors." In corporate offices, in cafes, in quiet living rooms, people leaned closer to their screens, not just to witness, but to interpret. Because this was no longer just a private unraveling. It had become public evidence. At Caldwell Enterprises headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted overnight. Assistants spoke in hushed tones. Meetings were delayed. Screens in conference rooms displayed not market data, but news coverage, each segment adding another layer to a narrative that refused to slow down. Ethan Caldwell stood at the head of a long glass table, his posture still straight, his presence still commanding, but something in the room had changed. The people seated around him were no longer just colleagues. They were observers. "We need a statement," one executive said carefully, choosing his words with precision. "Something clear. Something immediate," another added. "Investors are already asking questions." Ethan listened, his expression controlled, his fingers resting lightly against the table. But his silence stretched just long enough to reveal that this was no longer a situation he could resolve with a single decision. Because statements can redirect attention. They cannot erase what has already been seen. Meanwhile, Vanessa Blake sat in her own office across town, the city skyline reflecting in the glass behind her, her phone lighting up continuously with messages, missed calls, headlines. She did not answer them. Not yet. Instead, she watched one video in particular, the moment paused just before Olivia spoke, just before everything shifted. She studied it, frame by frame, as if understanding it could somehow undo it. But understanding does not reverse. Exposure. Back in the hospital room, Olivia finally reached for her phone. She turned it over slowly, the screen lighting up instantly, notifications stacking one after another, messages from unknown numbers, from distant acquaintances, from people who had never spoken to her before but now felt connected to her story. She did not open them. Not immediately. Instead, she held the phone in her hand for a moment, her gaze steady, her breathing even. Because this was no longer about reacting. This was about choosing. And for the first time in a long time, the choice was entirely hers. Outside, the city moved forward, traffic flowing, conversations continuing, headlines updating, but inside that room, something had already settled into place. Not closure. Not yet. But direction. And direction, once found, does not easily change. The phone screen glowed in Olivia Caldwell's hand, but she did not scroll, not yet, because she understood something most people never do in moments like this, that information moves fast, but truth moves differently, and if you rush to meet it, you lose control of how it lands. She tapped once, opening the first notification, a message from an unknown number that simply read, "You were right to speak." She did not reply. Another followed, then another, voices from strangers who had only seen a fragment of her life but felt certain enough to respond to it. Support, curiosity, speculation, all blending together into something louder than silence but not yet meaningful. Across the city, the narrative continued to evolve, no longer just about a moment at a gala, but about patterns, timelines, connections that people were now eager to uncover. "Sources suggest this may have been ongoing for months," a news anchor reported, her tone measured, careful, but unmistakably engaged. Images appeared on screen, not new, but newly noticed, photographs from past events, subtle interactions now reinterpreted under a different light. At Caldwell Enterprises, the pressure had begun to formalize. Legal teams moved quickly, drafting statements, reviewing footage, analyzing exposure. "We need to get ahead of this," one advisor said, his voice firm but restrained. "If we do not define the narrative, it will define us." Ethan Caldwell stood near the window, the city stretching below him, his reflection faint against the glass, a man who had built his life on clarity now facing something far less predictable. "Prepare the statement," he said finally. His voice controlled, but quieter than before. "Focus on privacy. Emphasize misunderstanding." The words were precise, practiced, but even as he spoke them, the room did not respond with certainty. Because misunderstanding implies confusion. And there was nothing confused about what people believed they had seen. Vanessa Blake, meanwhile, had not left her office. The skyline outside remained unchanged, but inside, everything felt narrower, more contained. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message she did open. A single line from someone she recognized. "They are asking about you directly now." She stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, then set the phone down without answering, her composure still intact, but no longer effortless. Because control requires distance, and distance was disappearing. Back in the hospital, Olivia shifted slightly, adjusting against the pillows, her body responding to its own rhythm, steady, grounded, present. A doctor entered, reviewing her chart briefly before offering a calm nod. "Everything is progressing as expected," he said. "You have time. Try to rest." Time. The word settled differently now. Not as something she had lost, but as something she had regained. She looked down at her phone again, her thumb hovering over the screen, then moving with quiet intention. Not to scroll. Not to search. But to select. She opened a message thread that had remained untouched for months. Ethan's name at the top. The last message from him short, distant, transactional. She read it once, then locked the screen again. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood that what mattered had already been said. Outside her room, footsteps moved through the hallway, voices low, the world continuing as it always does, indifferent to individual stories, but responsive to collective attention. And somewhere beyond those walls, decisions were being made, strategies forming, reputations shifting. But inside that room, Olivia remained still, centered, no longer reacting to what had happened, but preparing, quietly, for what would happen next. Because once a story reaches the point where it no longer belongs to one person, the only power left is in how you choose to move forward. And she had already begun. The message did not come from Olivia, and that was the part no one expected. At precisely 11:42 a.m., while headlines continued to refresh and speculation filled every gap left by uncertainty, a statement was released under the official account of Caldwell Enterprises, clean, concise, carefully worded, and within seconds, it began circulating faster than anything from the night before. "We are aware of the incident that occurred at a private event," it read, the language neutral, controlled, distant. "The matter is personal in nature and has been mischaracterized in public discussion. We asked for privacy as we addressed this situation internally." For a moment it worked. Just for a moment. The tone, the structure, the authority behind it created a brief pause in the noise, a small window where doubt could re-enter the conversation. On television screens and social media feeds, commentators leaned in again, dissecting the phrasing, debating the intent. "Mischaracterized," one analyst repeated slowly. "That is a strong word." Another responded. "It suggests there is more we are not seeing." And that was exactly the point. In his office, Ethan Caldwell stood with his arms crossed, watching the statement appear across multiple screens at once, his expression unreadable, his posture returning to something familiar, something controlled. For the first time since the night before, the narrative had shifted slightly, not away from him, but into something less certain, less defined. And in uncertainty, there is always room to rebuild. "Give it an hour," he said quietly to the team around him. "Let it settle." Across town, Vanessa Blake saw the statement at the same time. She read it once, then again, her eyes narrowing slightly, recognizing the strategy immediately. Distance. Ambiguity. Control. It was the kind of response that had protected reputations before, that had redirected attention just long enough for interest to fade. But this time felt different, and even she could sense it. Because this time, there was something the statement did not account for. Back in the hospital room, Olivia Caldwell sat in silence, the same statement now glowing on her screen. She read every word, slowly, carefully, not with anger, not with surprise, but with a kind of quiet acknowledgement, as if she had been expecting this exact response long before it arrived. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, then moved with intention, not to respond publicly, not to argue, but to open something else entirely. A video. Not the one the world had already seen, not the one replayed in headlines and commentary, but something earlier, something quieter, something no one else had access to yet. The frame showed a different night, a different setting, but the same people, the same proximity, the same truth, only this time without an audience, without performance. Olivia watched it once, her expression unchanged, then locked her phone again, placing it gently beside her. She did not upload it. Not yet. Because timing, she understood now more than ever, was everything. Outside her room, the hallway remained calm, footsteps passing, voices low, the world continuing without interruption. But beyond those walls, the shift had already begun again. The statement had created a pause, but not a resolution. And in that pause, questions grew louder, not quieter. If it is mischaracterized, someone asked online, then what really happened? The comments multiplied, curiosity replacing certainty, but not erasing it. And in his office, Ethan Caldwell watched the same question appear again and again, each repetition pressing against the control he had just begun to rebuild. Because statements can slow a story. They cannot stop it. And somewhere, just beyond his reach, there was something else waiting to be seen. Something he had not planned for. Something that had not been released. Yet. The question did not fade. It multiplied. Within minutes, it was no longer just a comment under a post or a line in a discussion thread, it became the center of the conversation itself, repeated across platforms, echoed in broadcasts, reshaped into headlines that no longer asked quietly but demanded clarity. If it was mischaracterized, then show us what really happened. In his office, Ethan Caldwell read those exact words on 3 different screens at once, each version slightly different, each carrying the same weight. His jaw tightened, not in panic, but in recognition. Because he understood something critical, the moment the public stops reacting and starts questioning, control does not just weaken, it fractures. We need more than a statement, one of his advisors said, leaning forward, voice measured but urgent. We need something tangible. Proof. Context. Otherwise this keeps growing. Ethan did not answer immediately. He was thinking, calculating, mapping out possibilities the way he always had, but this time the variables were incomplete, and incomplete variables do not lead to stable outcomes. Across town, Vanessa Blake was no longer sitting still. She paced once across her office, then again, her heels clicking softly against the floor, a sound that once carried confidence now echoing with something sharper. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then finally made a call. We need to align, she said as soon as the line connected, her voice controlled but no longer effortless. This is escalating faster than expected. But even as she spoke, she knew alignment required something they no longer fully shared, control over the narrative. Back in the hospital, Olivia Caldwell sat quietly, the same question now appearing on her screen again and again, each repetition reinforcing what she already knew. The pause had worked, just as she intended. Not to stop the story, but to shift it. From assumption to demand. From reaction to expectation. She picked up her phone once more, her movements calm, deliberate, and this time, she did not hesitate. She opened the video again, the earlier one, the one no one else had seen, and instead of watching it fully, she scrolled to a specific moment, stopping precisely where it mattered most. The frame was still, but the implication was not. She studied it for a second, then another, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady. A nurse entered briefly, checking her chart, offering a soft smile, unaware of the decision forming in that quiet room. Let me know if you need anything, she said gently before stepping back out, leaving Olivia alone again with the silence that no longer felt empty. Because silence, when chosen, is not absence. It is preparation. Across the city, the conversation continued to build, faster now, louder, no longer satisfied with partial answers. If there is more, it will come out, a commentator said on a midday segment, her tone confident, almost certain. It always does. And in that moment, Olivia tapped the screen. Not to share everything. Not yet. But to send the video to a single contact, someone whose name carried weight in a different way, someone who did not react, but verified. The message contained no explanation, no context, just a file and a single line beneath it. You asked what really happened. She locked the phone and set it down again, her gaze steady, her posture relaxed, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Because now, the story was no longer waiting to be discovered. It was being delivered. And somewhere, beyond her reach but not beyond her control, someone was pressing play. The video was only 42 seconds long, but it did not need to be longer. By the time it finished playing, the person who received it did not rewind, did not question, did not hesitate. Because some things do not require interpretation when they are already clear. Within 20 minutes, a message was sent back. Understood. No emotion. No commentary. Just confirmation. And that was enough. Across the city, the shift began again, quieter this time, but far more precise. A well-known investigative account, one that had built its reputation on accuracy rather than speed, posted a single line just after noon. New footage received. Verification in progress. That was all it took. The tone was different from everything else that had circulated so far. No speculation. No exaggeration. Just intent. And intent, when credible, moves faster than noise. In his office, Ethan Caldwell saw the post within seconds. His screen refreshed automatically, but this time, he did not look at the comments first. He looked at the source. And when he recognized it, something in his posture shifted, not visibly to anyone else in the room, but enough for him to feel it. Who contacted them? He asked quietly, not raising his voice, but directing the question in a way that did not require a response. Because he already knew the answer was not going to help him. Around him, the team moved quickly again, pulling data, tracking the account, attempting to anticipate what might come next, but anticipation requires time, and time was no longer on their side. Vanessa Blake saw the same post moments later. This time, she did not pace. She did not call anyone. She simply stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the glass behind it, as if she were seeing something she had not prepared for. Because denial works best when the story is unclear. But verification changes everything. Back in the hospital room, Olivia Caldwell sat exactly where she had been, her phone resting beside her, silent now. She had not checked for a response. She had not followed the post. She did not need to. Because once she sent it, the outcome was no longer dependent on her reaction. A soft knock came at the door, and a nurse stepped in, her tone gentle. You have a visitor, she said, stepping aside slightly. A man in a dark suit entered, his presence calm, composed, carrying none of the urgency that filled the world. Outside. Ms. Caldwell, he said, offering a brief nod. I represent the party you contacted. Olivia met his gaze, steady, unshaken. Has it been reviewed? She asked, her voice quiet but direct. The man nodded once. It has, he replied. A pause. Then, with the same calm certainty. And it will be released. No dramatics. No emphasis. Just a statement of fact. Outside, the post had already begun to spread, people sharing it not because they knew what it contained, but because they trusted what it would reveal. If they are verifying it, it must be real. Someone wrote. This changes everything. Another added. And for the first time since the statement had been released that morning, the word, mischaracterized, began to disappear from the conversation, replaced by something far more direct. Waiting for the truth. In his office, Ethan Caldwell set his phone down slowly, his mind moving faster now, recalculating, restructuring, but every path led to the same realization. Whatever was coming next was not something he had approved, not something he had seen, and not something he could stop. And across town, Vanessa Blake finally exhaled, the control she had maintained slipping just enough to feel the weight of what was about to happen. Because in a world that runs on perception, verification is not just exposure. It is conclusion. And somewhere, in a quiet room filled with steady light and measured silence, Olivia Caldwell had just ensured that the ending would no longer be rewritten by anyone else. The release did not come with a countdown. It arrived without warning, without build-up, without spectacle, and that was precisely why it landed with so much force. At 2:17 p.m., the verified account posted a single video, captioned with just 6 words. "This is what was not seen." No music. No commentary. Just the footage. Within seconds, the view count began to climb, not gradually, but in surges, thousands at a time, as if the entire audience had been waiting for something real to replace everything else. In offices, in living rooms, in crowded cafes, people stopped mid-conversation, mid-step, mid-thought, pressing play with a kind of collective anticipation that rarely arrives without disappointment. But this time, there was no disappointment. The video showed what words could not soften and statements could not redirect. It showed context. It showed timing. It showed intention without needing to name it. And, most importantly, it showed consistency, a pattern that aligned too cleanly with everything Olivia Caldwell had said the night before. By the time it ended, there was no pause for interpretation. The comments did not ask questions this time. They reached conclusions. "That explains everything. She told the truth. This was not mischaracterized." The language shifted in real time, certainty replacing doubt, clarity replacing speculation. Back at Caldwell Enterprises, the atmosphere changed instantly. Not gradually. Instantly. Conversation stopped. Screens filled with the same video. No one needed to explain it. No one needed to summarize it. Because everyone in the room understood what it meant. Ethan Caldwell stood where he had been all day, but now the space around him felt different, not just quieter, but distant, as if an invisible line had been drawn that no one was willing to cross anymore. His phone buzzed again, then continuously, but he did not reach for it right away. Because for the first time, there was nothing to manage. Nothing to reframe. Nothing to delay. The story had reached its end without his permission. Across town, Vanessa Blake did not finish watching the video. She stopped it halfway through, her hand lowering the phone slowly, her reflection staring back at her from the dark screen, no longer composed, no longer controlled, just present. Because presence, without perception to support it, reveals more than it protects. In the hospital room, Olivia Caldwell did not watch the video at all. She did not need to. She was sitting by the window now, sunlight resting gently across her shoulders, her hands still placed over her stomach, feeling the steady rhythm that had remained constant through everything. The man who had visited earlier stood near the door, his posture unchanged, his tone just as calm as before. "It is done," he said simply. Olivia nodded once, not with relief, not with triumph, but with understanding. Because this was never about winning. It was about ending something that had gone on too long without being seen. Outside, the headlines updated again, but this time, they did not question. They confirmed. New footage supports claims. Narrative shifts after verified release. Public reaction turns. And with each update, the space for denial grew smaller, until it disappeared entirely. Ethan Caldwell finally picked up his phone, his eyes scanning the screen, but the words no longer felt like something he could rearrange. They felt final. Around him, people began to move again, not toward him, but away, quiet decisions made without announcement, without confrontation, but with clarity that did not require explanation. Because in the end, influence is not lost in a moment. It is lost when people decide they no longer believe the version of you that you present. And in a quiet hospital room, far from cameras and headlines, Olivia Caldwell closed her eyes briefly, not to escape the moment, but to settle into it, as the world outside finally caught up to a truth she had already accepted long before anyone else chose to see it. Some men spend years building an image that looks like power. It only takes one moment of truth to show what it was never built to withstand.